Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie noob nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink I have in sample form. It's from Noodlers. It's part of their UK series of ink. Empire Red. It's supposed to be a permanent sort of document red ink. And all the tests were done in this Platinum Preppy. In fact, it's still in there. Yep. Let's see if it writes. Oh my god, it's a miracle! Sorry. Few inks have frustrated me as much as this ink. And we'll get to that. Thought I'd compare it to a few other permanent or document inks. Here's Empire Red on the end. You can see it's fairly light. It's has that woolly texture that a lot of permanent inks get. Here's Diatramentus's Document Red. You can see it's a bit darker, shades a bit more. And here's Noodler's Eternal Fox, which, as you can see, is just a solid pool of red. And look at how much darker it is than the other two. This is such a solid, solid red. If it is my go-to permanent red. I mean, look at how good that is. Fantastic. Now, this has some interesting chromatography. I will splice in an interesting discovery now. Now, let's look at those chromatographies. Now, this is how you're supposed to do chromatography. You know, you put the ink on the sheet and then instantly dunk it in water and watch as it moves up. Can you see that little band down there around the circle? See how it didn't want to move? And then you see how eventually some of it does move? Well, it was actually inks like this that prompted me to let the ink dry in the chromatography paper and see what would happen. So here's normal. Here's after 1 minute. See how that circle gets more dense? Here's 2 minutes. See how it gets more and more full? Here's 3. Here's 5. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. It definitely comes up in that clip I showed you. You see that yellowish stuff right there? Interesting. Anyways, onto the paper test. Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. This is a really light ink, and it's extremely dry. I had to really fight the pen. In fact, I had to, like, you know, if you pull out the nib unit, you know, there's like this straw, you know, that goes all the way down through there and into the converter, or in this case, cartridge. And there's a channel in it that leads the ink up to the nib, and I had to gouge out that channel just to get it to work. It's a Platinum Preppy in medium. 9 seconds to dry. You see that there's shading, but hopefully this will come through on camera. It's so obscenely pale and thin looking that you kind of need that shading to make it more readable. Yeah, I mean, there's no bleed, there's no feather, there's no spread, nothing like that, but it's so light, it's actually difficult to read. Water test really didn't move. I mean, I scrubbed it, and then because it's a permanent ink, I thought I'd do a bleach test, which sort of just made that sort of weird yellow we saw in the chromatography appear, which was weird, so see how many times I can say weird. Here's Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Again, really, really thin. I mean, you can see the dots from the dot pad under there. It's very thin, very pale. 8 seconds to dry. You still get some shading, and you kind of need it. Otherwise, it's just a bit too pale. Yeah, no bleed, feather, no spread. In that way, it's very well behaved. Since it's so light, there's really not much echo at all. Again, the water test, I really scrubbed it, but nothing moved. Bleach test, again, it sort of just brought out that weird yellow. Still didn't move much. I mean, it's resisting bleach pretty well. Now, next is Tomoe River Paper, where for some reason, this is where I had the most hard starts. 10 seconds to dry. So you can see there's still some very nice shading going on, and again, you kind of need it because it's so pale and so thin on here. Yeah, again, no bleed, no feather, no spread, and again, there's very little echo due to just how pale of an ink it is. But again, this is very thin paper, so. Water test did very, very admirably well, considering Tomoe River loves to let ink just slide away. Bleach test, this might be the worst bleach test we see, but even still, if you had to, you could recover that. So next is 20-pound copier paper, where it took 4 seconds to dry, and where you still get a bit of shading, but in those places where you get shading, it's also where you get some bleed, and it definitely spread. If you look at the line width between these two, you can see that it got a bit broader. And I don't know if this is going to come through on camera, but you can kind of see them. You see these dots? There are a bunch of little dots coming through, which surprised me for just how dry of a writer this was. And it was actually kind of struggling to keep up with the paper, even after I'd like gouged out the channel. But again, very impressive water test. Didn't move, didn't blink. Totally still there. Now, the camera is turning this much lighter, but can you see that in yellow? So you could, if you could read that yellow, you know, if you sort of sat down and looked for yellow instead of red, you could recover that. Not ideal, but next is Mead Notebook Paper, where it is still so pale, and you still only get a little bit of shading, and where you do, that's where you get the bleed. So, I mean, Preppies are dry writers as it is, and this is already a really dry ink, and then you add this fairly absorbent paper, and you're going to have problems. But again, fantastic water test. Bleach, it just sort of turned it yellow, still mostly there. And lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, but this is that oddly well-behaved Moleskine notebook paper. And I tried to show this in another video, but you see the sort of the texture of the paper here, how it looks like paper. And then you turn it over, you see how shiny that is? So usually this paper means that there's no bleed through, but as you might have gotten a little glimpse of, there's some bleed through. You get dots. And again, this is that freakishly well-behaved paper, and it's very dry writing and a dry writing pen, and yet this is still happening. And you still get some feathering. I hope you'll be able to see that. It's, you see the dots, you know, where it's darkest, like at the ends of strokes. That's where you see some of the feathering. And again, still uncomfortably pale. And again, fantastic water test, didn't blink, didn't move. Bleach sort of turned it yellowy orange, but if you had to recover it, you definitely could. So there you go. There's Noodler's Empire Red from the UK series. As I said on one of these, I would recommend Eternal Fox 100 times more readily than I would recommend Empire Red. It's a decent enough ink. It's for a permanent ink, it's fairly well behaved, even on cheaper papers. It's obscenely dry writing in my experience, so definitely be prepared for that. It's extremely pale. Go for Eternal Fox, really. I mean, I like fell in love with this ink and everything it can do. It's fantastic, but anyways, there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.